February 20, 1943, north of Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The desert was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then the earth began to shake. Through the haze of dust and artillery smoke, 5 American Sherman tanks moved like they shared one mind. No flares, no flags, no orders shouted across the chaos. Yet every turn, every shot, every advance happened in perfect rhythm, as if each crew could see through the sand itself. German commanders watched in disbelief. Their own panzers hesitated, blinded by the static hissing in their radios. Orders cut out mid-sentence. Reports vanished into the noise. But the Shermans, they spoke in silence. Within minutes, they surrounded the German line, firing from positions no one had time to calculate. It wasn't luck. It wasn't magic. It was the moment and invisible. Technology turned a handful of American tanks into something Germany's engineers had never imagined: a network. The battlefield had gone wireless, and that was the day World War II changed forever. To the German tank commanders, it didn't make sense. American Shermans were slower, thinner, and armed with weaker guns. Yet somehow, they fought like predators who could see the entire map. At Kasserine, their movements looked impossible. Each Sherman covered the other's blind spots perfectly, weaving through broken terrain where no visual signals could reach. It was like watching chess pieces move themselves. German intelligence filed confused, reports describing what they called ghost coordination. 5 tanks maneuvering as one, with no line of sight, no messengers, no flares, nothing. Some officers blamed luck. Others suspected prearranged signals. A few even whispered that the Americans were using some kind of experimental radar. But they were wrong, because while the Germans searched the skies for secret weapons, the Americans were already winning a war that couldn't be seen. A war fought not with armor, but with frequencies. What the Germans couldn't hear through the static, the Shermans were saying loud and clear. And the truth behind that silence would soon expose the biggest technological gap of the entire war. While German officers tried to make sense of the impossible, the answer sat inside every American Sherman: a 181-pound box of wires, crystals, and genius called the SCR-508 radio. Built by Motorola in Chicago, it didn't just send messages, it changed the physics of communication on the battlefield. Unlike the German FUG-5 system, which used amplitude modulation, the American SCR-508 ran on frequency modulation, FM. The difference was night and day. German radios cracked, hissed, and drowned in static every time a tank engine roared or artillery thundered. Orders were lost mid-sentence. Commanders shouted into static storms. The Sherman's FM radio? Crystal clear. Its 25-watt transmitter cut through noise like a blade through paper, transmitting clean voice signals for miles. Even while moving, it gave every tank its own voice. Every crew has its own link. Every platoon has the ability to move like one living organism. For the first time in history, armored warfare wasn't about who had the thickest armor or the biggest gun. It was about who could talk. And thanks to a handful of engineers in Detroit and Chicago, the Americans were suddenly speaking a language the Germans couldn't even hear. The irony was brutal. Germany had invented radio warfare. Heinz Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg, built his empire on fast-moving, radio-connected tanks. But by 1943, that empire was running on static. Only 1 or 2 tanks in a German platoon could actually transmit orders. The rest? Just receivers. Soldiers locked in radio silence, waiting for commands that often never came. And when those precious command tanks were destroyed, easy to spot by their extra antennas, the rest of the platoon went blind, deaf, and doomed. The FUG-5 radios they relied on had just 10 watts of power. Their signals could barely reach 2 kilometers on a good day, less if the engines were running. Every spark plug firing, every track grinding across sand, created a burst of electrical noise that swallowed their own voices. So while German tank crews shouted into voids filled with static, American crews were whispering cleanly across entire battlefields. For the Wehrmacht, the war became a series of isolated fights, tanks dying one by one, never realizing that the enemy wasn't faster or stronger, just better connected. And that single blind spot, invisible, silent, electromagnetic, would haunt German armor all the way to Berlin. The first test came at Kasserine Pass, February 1943. To the world, it looked like an American defeat. But to the Germans listening through static, it was something far worse. In the middle of chaos, scattered American tank units stayed connected across 50 miles of desert. Crews who had never met before called for artillery, warned of ambushes, and coordinated counterattacks with precision that made no sense. The Germans noted it in disbelief. American radio discipline exceptional. Coordination impossible under current conditions. They didn't realize they were witnessing the future of warfare. Then came Italy, 1943. The mountains should have made radios useless, but FM waves bounced cleanly through valleys where German AM signals died completely. Sherman platoons separated by ridgelines moved like they shared a single brain, striking from angles that German doctrine said were impossible. And by Normandy, June 1944, the advantage had evolved into dominance. Sherman tanks rolled off landing craft and instantly linked to naval fire support. In real time, tank commanders coordinated with destroyers offshore. Something no German system could dream of. Meanwhile, German units in the hedgerows relied on shouting, hand signals, and luck. On paper, their tanks were superior. In practice, they were fighting ghosts. Ghosts who could talk to each other. Behind every Sherman tank's calm voice on the battlefield was a storm of American engineering. In Chicago, the Motorola factory, once a maker of car radios, transformed into a war machine of its own. Engineers like Daniel E. Noble and Henry Magnuski took Edwin Armstrong's new frequency modulation technology and forged it into something no army had ever fielded, the SCR-508, a battlefield network disguised as a radio. Each unit contained more than 2,700 components, resistors, capacitors, crystal oscillators, all hand-built with military precision. It could generate 25 watts of power, twice that of the German Fug-5, and hold 10 crystal-locked channels that never drifted off frequency, even under tank vibration and heat. Motorola built more than 50,000 of them, enough to equip every one of America's 49,000 Sherman tanks, something no other nation came close to achieving. The result? A fully connected armored force where every tank could lead, follow, or command instantly. The U.S. hadn't just built tanks. It had built nodes in the world's first combat network. German Panzers fought as individuals. The Shermans fought as one machine with 49,000 minds linked by radio waves. The real superweapon of World War II wasn't made of steel. It was made of signal. German intelligence had seen strange things before, but nothing like this. Reports from the front kept describing the same nightmare. American tanks reacting faster than anyone could give orders. Entire units pivoting in seconds, as if some unseen commander controlled them all. To the Germans, it looked like perfect discipline. In truth, it was perfect communication. Captured reports from 1944 described unusually high coordination between U.S. tank elements. Analysts concluded it was due to rigid radio training. They never realized it wasn't about training at all. It was technology. So they kept aiming for command tanks, thinking if they destroyed the leader, the rest would collapse. But every Sherman could transmit. Every Sherman could take command. Destroy one, and another instantly picked up the call. The result was psychological warfare in its purest form. German tank crews began to feel isolated, abandoned, trapped inside their own armor. Every time they called for help, the only answer was static. Meanwhile, American crews heard the calm, steady voices of comrades miles away. Target marked, flank left, fire when ready. That difference, one side surrounded by silence, the other surrounded by voices, changed everything. And by the time the Wehrmacht realized it, the war was already lost on frequencies they couldn't even tune into. When the guns finally went silent in 1945, most people credited the Sherman's numbers, not its voices. But the truth was deeper. Every one of those 49,000 tanks carried the same invisible weapon, a 181-pound box that turned steel into strategy, chaos into coordination, and isolation into unity. Historians would later call it the birth of network-centric warfare, the idea that the side best connected always wins. The lesson echoed long after the war, in Korea, in Vietnam, in the Gulf War. The armies that could communicate ruled the battlefield. Radios became data links, voices became digital signals, and today, satellites and encrypted networks still trace their DNA back to the SCR-508 that once hummed inside a Sherman tank. Even Germany learned the lesson. A post-war Bundeswehr manual admitted, "Our defeat came not from inferior tanks, but from inferior communication." In the end, the Sherman's real armor wasn't steel. It was connection. Because in war, as in life, the side that hears, shares, and moves together always defeats the side that fights alone.